This module will help you peek under the hood of Mrs. Dalloway a bit. We're going to talk about a number of things that will help you read and understand the novel. First, let's talk about the structure of the novel. As I said in the previous module's video lecture, the draft version of this novel was called The Hours, until close to the time when Woolf completed it. Clock time frames the action of the book, and when we forget clock time, we have a clock's bell chiming to remind us. The book doesn't have traditional chapters, but it does have sections. The sections are marked very subtly. There's just a bit of extra space on the page, but you can see when a new section is beginning because something physical from the outside world, a sight, a sound, an omnibus, appears at both the close of one section and the beginning of the next. That shared physical phenomenon, whatever it is, grounds the reader in a particular moment in time. Let's look at where the first section of the book ends and the second begins. In my book, this is on page 13, only a very few pages into the book. We may be looking at a strategy like the one Joyce deployed in A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, in which he used the first short section of the book to teach readers what they need to know in order to navigate his experimental novel. Here in Mrs. Dalloway, a sudden noise distracts Clarissa and Miss Pym from their perusal of the flowers. Startled, they run to the window to see what is going on. Now the scene shifts to the same moment, but outside the shop. Everyone has heard the noise of the motorcar backfiring. Everyone now turns toward the sound and sees an impressive vehicle. They all begin to speculate on who is in the car, a mass speculation that will follow the car on its path toward Buckingham Palace, but will be abandoned when a more exciting mystery, a skywriting airplane, appears. Note that Woolf moved from the first hour of the novel, when Clarissa declared she would buy the flowers herself and set out to walk to the flower shop, to the second hour, which begins with speculation on the motor car, but introduces us to several characters who will become important in the novel, through something in the real world that intrudes on the consciousness of all who observe it. A lot of things are uncertain in this novel. The fact that various clocks ring at different times tells us that even clock time is not as stable as we might want it to be. But there are shared moments of connection between people based on happenings in the real world. The connections come through consciousness. So, for instance, no one can agree on who was in the car, and in fact, we never know, nor on what the skywriting plane is advertising. Surplus warplanes frequently appeared in the skies of London, advertising commercial goods at this time. But there is a kernel of truth in every exchange. We all heard the bang. We all saw the plane. Now let's look at a later exchange that is a bit more subtle. In this handover between sections, Elizabeth is leaving her tea with Miss Kilman and is getting on an omnibus. Let's look at this passage, which begins on page 138 in my book. Here, a puff of wind blows a cloud across the sun, momentarily creating shadow. As the cloud changes the quality of light in this specific part of London, Elizabeth gets on the bus. Nearby, but not within sight, Septimus in his flat observes the cloud passing over the sun, the mobile, dappled shade it creates, and the omnibuses in the Strand. He interprets the changing light according to his own consciousness, which is, of course, affected by his shell shock. The novel's new section continues with a focus on Septimus. Time is a physical presence in the novel, whether it is marked by the tolling of bells or a shared phenomenon like a cloud momentarily blocking out the sun. But it is not the authoritative boss that Big Ben's leaden circles make it out to be. When Woolf describes the clock of St. Margaret's chiming 2 minutes after Big Ben's leaden circles, she personifies it as a woman distracted with cares. But here, the other clock, the clock which always struck 2 minutes after Big Ben, came shuffling in with its lap full of odds and ends, which it dumped down as if Big Ben were all very well with his majesty laying down the law, so solemn, so just, but she must remember all sorts of little things besides. Mrs. Marsham, Ellie Henderson, glasses for ices. All sorts of little things came flooding and lapping and dancing in on the wake of that solemn stroke, which lay flat like a bar of gold on the sea. As the narrative voice gives us this description, it morphs into Clarissa's concerns about her party, so that we see the distracted St. Margaret's clock as having much in common with the novel's protagonist. A novel of consciousness will always be a novel of character, a novel in which exploring and developing character is as important or more important than plot. Since the beginning of the novel in English, there has been tension between the novel's focus on character — the novel is an art form developed to explore the human being in depth — and its focus on plot. Novels effect their inquiries into humanity by putting particular imagined personalities into challenging situations. So let's take a minute to think about the characters in Mrs. Dalloway. Let's start with Clarissa. What do we know about her? Well, we know that she is the daughter of a well-to-do family raised at a country estate called Burton. She had a sister who died due to her father's negligence about a swing. She was beautiful as a young woman, and several men sought to marry her, among them Peter Walsh and Richard Dalloway. For Clarissa, as for all young women in her social class, the choice of who to marry is the most consequential choice of her entire life. Clarissa's family expects her to marry well. In these families, women bring a small amount of money into the marriage, which is usually set aside to take care of her and her children in case her husband predeceases her. The bulk of the family estate would pass to the eldest son. Much of it is likely entailed so that it can't be divided fairly between the children. Clarissa's upbringing has prepared her to be a society hostess and a helpful spouse to an important man. In the novel, we see Clarissa at her work, preparing for a party arranged in part to advance her husband's political career. Clarissa's marriage isn't loveless. Richard brings her flowers as a way to say "I love you," since he cannot utter these words. But it is perhaps a bit more aloof than romantic minds might favor. However, remember that part of the reason Clarissa marries Richard is to ensure her privacy in marriage. She doesn't want to marry someone like Peter, who will be pestering her all the time for attention. Richard Dalloway is an upright and decent man, perhaps a bit unimaginative and restrained. He is politically ambitious and expects to be Prime Minister one of these days. He needs his private life to be impeccably unexceptional, and by marrying Clarissa, he has achieved that. Peter Walsh, as we discussed last week, is a mess. I think of him as Hugh Grant in his bad boy mode. He is charming and fun, he is up for anything, and he seems to only make bad decisions. When he turns up again in London, Clarissa immediately remembers how much fun he is and has a moment of regret that she married Richard instead. But this regret is only momentary, because Peter makes his own emotional weather wherever he goes, and he is not happy when things are calm and orderly. I think we probably all know someone like this, someone who always has drama going on around them, who upon completing a massive home renovation immediately tears out the new kitchen. They can be very exciting friends, but they are exhausting. Clarissa, as an 18-year-old, recognized that marriage to Peter would mean a lifetime of messes that he would need rescuing from. She wouldn't have peace and quiet, let alone stability, because of his toddler-like need to be the center of everything. We can see how his impulsiveness and love of drama plays out for him in his current mission in London, trying to arrange a divorce so he can rectify the sticky situation he's created around his current girlfriend, Daisy, the wife of a man who is sort of like Peter's boss and who is the mother of 2 small children. That Peter acts rashly is demonstrated by the fact that here in London, following an attractive set of hips down the street, Peter acknowledges that he is already tired of Daisy. Another character at Burton that we must pay attention to is Sally Seton. Sally is a friend of Clarissa's who comes from a family described as poor as church mice. Sally is a member of the same social class as Clarissa, or she wouldn't have been invited to stay at Burton. But her family doesn't have enough money to stay in that class moving forward. Sally really needs to marry well. That is, not necessarily to someone of her own class, but to someone with money, preferably someone with a lot of money. She marries an industrialist, trading her class position for his money. Because of Sally's class bona fides, her 5 sons can go to Eton. Because of her husband's riches, they can afford to pay the bill. Sally's need to bring some money into her family is one reason the erotic spark between Clarissa and Sally can never grow. The other, of course, is the seeming impossibility of 2 women being in love or acting on that love in the late Victorian era, when they were young at Burton. Miss Kilman is an example of what happens to women who don't marry in this society. During the war, her German last name made her a pariah, and after the war, with so many dead, there aren't enough marriageable young men around for all the young women who need husbands. These women were called, cruelly, surplus women. Miss Kilman takes refuge in her peculiar religious beliefs, resentment of all who she perceives have so stunted her life possibilities, and wishful daydreams about getting Elizabeth away from her mother, which Miss Kilman perceives as a potential slap in the face to the ruling class. I want to talk about Rhesia before we talk about Septimus. Because Septimus's symptoms are so engaging, readers might miss what's going on in Rhesia's head. First of all, she is very young. She is fairly naive, and she is very surprised at the way her life is turning out and feels powerless to do much about it. She is the daughter of an innkeeper in Italy who met Septimus toward the end of the war when he was suffering from acute shell shock. She found Septimus to be exotic and romantic, which was mainly because of her projecting her romantic notions on this severely traumatized soldier. After they marry, they move to England, where Rhesia knows no one and suffers from isolation and culture shock, not the best conditions for dealing with the problems of a shell-shocked veteran. Septimus, before the war, was viewed by all as a promising young man. He is a member of the lower middle class. He was clever enough to get into a good grammar school, but not rich enough to afford an elite school or to go to university. He works as a clerk in an office, where his employer holds his job open for his return. When Septimus does get home, he is, of course, in no shape to hold down a job. In Italy, Septimus witnessed the death of his best friend, Evans, the final trauma in a series of traumas that results in the severe symptoms we see in the novel. Now, 6 years after the war, Septimus continues to be haunted by his war experiences. He is one of the ones for whom the war is not over. His wife attempts to get help from a local GP, Dr. Holmes, who advises Septimus to man up and stop having symptoms, and from an expensive specialist, Sir William Bradshaw, who advises rest in the country, a classic disciplinary treatment for hysteria. Septimus recognizes that both Dr. Holmes and Sir William demand that he conform to their understanding of the proper way to be a man and a soldier. For Dr. Holmes, this means not worrying Rhesia by having symptoms of shell shock. For Sir William, this means repressing memories with the aim of restoring equilibrium. With these ideas on board, What do you think Woolf is suggesting through the connection she establishes between Septimus and Clarissa? What do you think she is saying about social coercion to be normal?